Hello and welcome to Inkscape. In this tutorial, I'll be giving you a complete overview of the Inkscape application and how to get started using it. A little bit about myself. My name is Nick Saporito and I've worked as a logo and branding designer for over 10 years, and I use Inkscape as my tool of choice when designing logos for my clients. The goal of this video is to provide you with a complete overview of the Inkscape application so that you can feel comfortable enough to start following some tutorials and creating vector artwork of your own. We won't be going over every tool and feature, but by the end of this video, you will have everything you need to know to get started. Now, if you've found this video, then chances are you probably already have some kind of idea of what Inkscape is. But just to briefly summarize, Inkscape is a free and open source vector graphics editor that serves as an alternative to Adobe Illustrator, which is currently the industry standard for vector design. And what I really like about Inkscape is that, despite being free and open source, it's one of the most advanced vector editors out there, coming packed with more features and abilities than even some of the paid apps. And just to clarify, vectors are graphics that are made of coordinate points that are placed on an X and Y axis, as opposed to pixel-based imagery. The benefit of working with vectors is that they can be scaled up infinitely, making them ideal for logos, icons, avatars, and so much more. I've been using Inkscape since 2009, and I've seen it come such a long way in that time. It's supported by a team of volunteers who built it as a labor of love and a passionate community that's always happy to help when needed. Without this community, the Inkscape project wouldn't be possible, so I'll leave a link in the description of the video if you want to contribute in any way. So getting us started here in Inkscape, when you launch the application for the first time, you should get this welcome dialog. This welcome dialog allows you to set up your document to work with. And if you don't have this welcome dialog, don't worry, we'll address that in just a minute. If it launches right into the software, I'll show you how to get this back. For those of you who do have this launched, I just want to briefly show you what this is and how it works. If you notice over here, we have three different tabs. We have Quick Setup, Supported by You, and Time to Draw. So starting off with the Quick Setup, we have the type of canvas we can work with. If you click on this drop-down, you'll see we have different types of canvases. We have the default. We have the dark canvas, so if you're an Illustrator user and you're used to working in a dark workspace, or maybe if you just prefer to work in a dark workspace, you can choose that. We have the checkerboard options. Now the checkerboard pattern, it's not actually part of the design, it's just there to help you indicate where the transparent areas of your artwork is. So if that's important to you, you could choose one of those, and then we just have a solid white workspace. So I'm just gonna leave mine at the default for now. And if you come down here, we have some keyboard options. Now, if you're migrating over to Inkscape from Illustrator or CorelDRAW or some other application, you can choose the keyboard layout for that application if you just want to use that previous layout. So let's say, for example, if you have all of the keyboard shortcuts for Illustrator memorized, you could just choose Adobe Illustrator from this list here, and now all of Illustrator's keyboard shortcuts will migrate over to Inkscape. So I'm going to leave mine at Inkscape default. And then down here, we have the appearance of the user interface, and we have a preview down here of what the icons look like. I have mine set to colorful, but we have some other options down here. For example, grayscale. That's what the icons look like with the color removed. We have the classic symbolic icons, so they're similar, but a little more simplified. And then we have the compacted for small screens. So if you're using like a smaller resolution display, like a MacBook Air or something like that, you may want to use that. And then we have the system default. And then finally, we have the classic old school Inkscape icons. So I'm gonna set mine back to colorful. These are the ones that I prefer to work with. And then over here, we could toggle the dark theme off and on. So by default, I think it's the light theme. If you prefer to work with a dark theme, you can just toggle that on right there. And again, if you don't have this welcome menu, I'll show you how to do this from within the software in just a minute. The Supported by You tab is just a couple of links to how you can contribute to the Inkscape team, whether it be as a programmer or with funding. And then over here we have Time to Draw. This has some templates for you to choose from. So if I come up top to where it says existing files, this just shows you the files that you most recently worked with. You can select print down here, and this gives you some print templates to work with. So for example, if you're designing an A4 portrait, you can just start right off from that template without having to manually size up your document like that. And if you scroll down, you can see we have some more templates to choose from as well. For example, we have the US number 10 envelope, which is a pretty common template to work with, DVD cover, so on and so forth. I'll come down here to the next one, which is video. These are some common video screen sizes to work with. Now, these aren't actual video files. This just determines the size of your canvas. So if you're designing like a frame for a video or something like that, and your video is going to be at 1080p, you can just set your canvas to 1920 by 1080 or 1080p automatically without having to manually do that. Down here we have some social media graphics. So for example, if you're designing a Facebook cover photo, you can just launch right into that template. Instagram portrait, LinkedIn company logo, so on and so forth. You can scroll through there and take a look at that if you want. And then down here we have screen. These are some common screen sizes. So if you're designing a splash screen for an app, for a mobile application or something along those lines, you can choose iPhone X or iPhone 5 or whatever else. Next up, we have the Shape Builder templates. The Shape Builder is a tool that we will be going over later on, but these are some common templates that you can work with as far as the Shape Builder goes. And then down here we have other, these are just miscellaneous templates. We have 16 by 16 icons. So for example, if you're designing a favicon for a website, or if you want to create a seamless pattern, so on and so forth. And then down here we have custom. Now, when you're working in Inkscape, you have the ability to create your own templates if you'd like to. And when you create your own templates, this is where they will be indexed. So you can see I have some of my own in here. So for example, default 2023 startup file, and you get the idea. And then finally down here, we have this tick box that allows you to determine whether or not you want to see this welcome menu every time you launch Inkscape. I like to keep this off by default because I usually can just jump right into the software and set things up my own. I don't like to have to go through this menu every time I launch the application, so I'll untick that. And once you're ready, you can click the New Document button to launch the software. So once you've created your new document, your workspace should look something like this. We have the gray space, which represents the unused area, and then we have the white space, which represents the document itself. You can use all of this space when you're working in Inkscape, but the white space represents the actual document itself. So if you were to save this as a PDF document, only the contents within this white box would be saved, and anything outside of it would be excluded. Just to give you an idea of how that works. Now, if you want to set up your document manually, what you could do is you can go to File, and you can select Document Properties. And from that menu, you have the ability to change the width and the height of your document. You can also choose one of the templates from this drop-down menu. So all of the templates that I showed you in that welcome menu, they're all in here if you want to choose one of them. So for example, if you're designing like a business card, you can find that in the list here, wherever that is. You see a whole bunch of different things here. Here we go, business card Europe, business card US, 2 by 3.5 inches, so on and so forth. Over here we have the units of measurement that you like to work with. If you're designing something for print, you may want to work with millimeters or centimeters or inches. If you're designing something for digital displays, for screens, you may want to work with pixels. I like to work with pixels personally, so I'm going to set mine to pixels. And the display units over here represents the units of measurements that are used within the software. So let's say, for example, you want to resize an object on your canvas. This tells you what you want to resize it by. If you want to resize it by millimeters, pixels, inches, or whatever other unit of measurement, this determines the default. Now you could change this anytime when you're working in the software, but this just allows you to set the default. So I don't want to have to manually change this every time I'm working with something. So I'm going to set this to inches, or no, I'm sorry, pixels. I like to work with pixels when I do this. And you could choose your orientation over here. You could choose portrait or landscape. I'm going to set mine to landscape. And let's say you wanted to manually resize your canvas to something of a specific size. Let's say, for example, I'm designing a thumbnail for a YouTube video. I'm going to size this at 1280 by 720. And there we go. The document updates in real time, as you can see there. Now over here, you could change the color of some of these elements. So the page color itself is white. If you want to change the page color, you could just click on this box right here and you could choose a new color from that menu there. Now, when you change the color of the page, you're not actually changing the color of anything pertaining to the document itself. You're just changing how it appears on your canvas. So if you were to export a design from a canvas with a different colored background, that different colored background wouldn't be part of the design. It's just there as your own display, as a personal reference. So let's say, for example, you're designing something that's going to be white. It's going to be difficult to do that on top of a white background. So you can come in here and change that color if you'd like to. You can use this box right here to change the color of the border, and then you could use this box right here to change the color of the desk or the workspace in the background, which is gray. Now, if you notice on the document, we have a thin black border going around the document, as well as a drop shadow coming off the side of it. None of this is part of the actual design or the document. This is all just part of the display, how it's displaying on your screen. But if you don't want that there, you could just disable it. You can get rid of the shadow, you can get rid of the border, and there you go. Once you're finished, you can close out of that menu and you're good to get started. Now let me show you how to get that welcome dialog in case you want to get that back and you don't have it. So what we're looking for is the Inkscape Preferences menu. If you're a Mac user, just come up here to where it says Inkscape and go to Settings. If you're a Windows user, I believe it's Edit, and you should see Preferences or Settings somewhere towards the bottom of this menu. The keyboard shortcut is Control-Shift-P. So I'm using Mac. I'm going to come over here to Inkscape and I'm going to choose Settings. And in this Settings menu, come up here to the search bar and just type in Welcome. And you should see right here, Show Welcome Dialog. If you tick that box, now that welcome menu will populate every time you launch the application. Otherwise, if it's unchecked, it won't launch. Now that we have a new document opened up, let's briefly go over Inkscape's layout so that you have some kind of an idea of what you're looking at when you launch the application. Up top, we have all of the different menu systems. Most of the tools and features within Inkscape can be found within one of these menus. And then over here to the left of the screen, you'll see your Inkscape tools. These are all the various tools that you can work with to create shapes and gradients and so on and so forth. If you're working with a display that has a lower resolution, say for example like a MacBook Air or something along those lines, you may notice that your tools run off the bottom of the screen and you don't see them all. If that's the case for you, you could just grab the edge of this menu and pull it out like this. And then all of your tools will be placed into vertical columns and you'll have this extra space down here and you could see all of those tools. Up top, we have the Tool Settings menu. Now this menu changes based on the tool that you have selected. So right now I have the Select tool enabled and you'll see these are all of the settings for the Select tool. If I choose the Rectangle tool, these are the settings for the Rectangle tool. And as I cycle through these tools, you'll notice that that menu changes. So this is your Inkscape Tools menu up here at the top. And then over here on the right-hand side of the screen, let me go back to my Selection tool. On the right-hand side of the screen, you'll see some basic system controls. These are always the same no matter what. A little trick for understanding what these are, and this works for basically anything in Inkscape. If you hover your cursor over the icon, a little label will populate telling you what it is. So for example, this menu right here allows you, or this button rather, allows you to create a new document. This is for opening a new document. You can save your document, print, import, export, undo, redo, so on and so forth. We have cut, paste, copy. All your basic system controls are located in this menu right here. And if you come down here to the bottom, you'll see some shortcuts for some of the common dockable menus. The dockable menus are what opens up on the right-hand side of the screen when you're working. So for example, this icon right here is the Fill and Stroke dialog. This is one of the most common dockable menus you'll be working with in Inkscape. So I'm going to click on that to open it. And you'll notice it opens over here on the right-hand side of the screen. We'll be going over this menu shortly, but I just wanted to give you an idea of what this is and where it's located. This is the Fill and Stroke menu. It allows you to apply fills and strokes and gradients and so on and so forth to an object that you have selected. And then over here we have some more dockable menus we could choose. For example, the Text menu. If I click on that, now the Text menu opens in a separate tab. And as we open new dockable menus, they will be opened in their own tabs. So if I click on this arrow over here to expand this, and I choose, let's say, the Layers and Objects menu, now that opens up in another tab as well. And a shortcut for accessing all of these menus is this icon over here in the top right corner. No, I'm sorry, this icon right here. If I click on this little downward arrow icon, you'll see we have all of our different dockable menus that exist within Inkscape can be accessed from this menu. So for example, if I wanted the Align and Distribute menu, I could select that, and now we have the Align and Distribute menu. Now you may notice when you're working with these menus, they kind of pop out a little far. They take up a lot of screen space, which is kind of a problem, especially when you're working with a lower resolution screen. The good thing about this menu is that this can be adjusted at any time. In fact, this menu closes kind of like a drawer. You can close that menu anytime you want, and when you want to get those menus back, you can just pop them back open just like that. Down here at the bottom of the screen, we have a color palette. This allows you to choose colors to apply to an object that you have selected, and you could use these arrows over here to cycle through this palette if you'd like. This is probably not the best way to choose a color because it gives you these stock options. If you want to choose a specific shade, the Fill and Stroke menu is really the best option to use. And like I said, we'll be going over that shortly. I just wanted to give you an idea of where this stuff is located. And if you want to change your color palette, if you click on this menu icon over here, we have all of these different types of color palettes to work with in Inkscape. And then finally down here at the bottom of the screen, we have some status indicators. So if you have an object selected, it'll show you what the object's fill color is and what its stroke color is. You could change its opacity. It tells you what layer it is. It shows you whether or not the layer is visible or locked. There's a little dialog right here that gives you little notes, that gives you tips when you're working. And then over here, the X and Y, this indicates where your cursor is located relative to the X and Y axis of the document. So if I bring my cursor all the way to the top left of the document, you'll see it goes to 0, 0, or close enough anyway, close to 0, 0, because this is location 0, 0 on the X and Y axis. And if I bring this all the way down to the right, it should be 1280 by 720, because this is a 1280 by 720 document. And then over here, this shows you the zoom factor. So right now I'm zoomed in at 88%. And then the rotation factor as well. You can rotate your canvas with this if you'd like. You can, if you see what I'm doing here, I'm rotating the view of my canvas. Now bear in mind when you do this, you're not actually rotating your artwork. You're just rotating your view of the canvas. So let's say, for example, you're working with a drawing tablet and you prefer to work at an angle when you're drawing, like calligraphy letters or something. You can set that there like that. So let me put that back. And that's a basic overview of Inkscape's layout. Now let's go over some basic controls for working in Inkscape. And these are important because knowing these basic controls can help save you a lot of time. So starting off, navigating around the canvas. If you notice on the bottom and the right-hand side of the screen, we have these scroll bars which allow you to move around the canvas left and right and up and down. This is actually a really inefficient way to navigate around your canvas. So what I would recommend doing is getting rid of these scroll bars by pressing Control B. Or if you're a Mac user, it would be Command B, and now we have extra screen real estate to work with. If you want to move around your canvas, the best way to do that is to hold down the mouse wheel and then just move your mouse around. So press down the mouse wheel and then move your mouse around. Or if you're using a magic trackpad like I'm doing, you can just swipe with 2 fingers. Now, one thing I'd like to point out, if you are a Mac user, I'll have a video linked in the description below. It's a starter guide for those of you who may be using Inkscape with a Mac. Inkscape isn't that much different on Mac as it is everywhere else, but there are some minor differences you may want to be aware of. So go check that video out if you're a Mac user. And if you want to zoom in and out, we have the zoom tool for that. And then we also have the zoom factor, which I just showed you previously. A better way to do that, though, would be to just hold your control key and roll up and down the mouse wheel, which will allow you to zoom in and out much easier. And again, if you're a Mac user and you're using a magic trackpad, all you have to do is pinch with 2 fingers, kind of like how you would zoom in and out on a photo with your smartphone. And that allows you to zoom in and out like that. And this is such an easier way to navigate around the canvas. So you could press down your mouse wheel to move around, hold Control, roll up and down the mouse wheel. And I would recommend doing this a little bit just to get familiar with it, because this is by far the easiest and most efficient way to navigate around the canvas. Now, if at any point you want to zoom to 100% so that you know what your work looks like at a 1-to-1 view and you're not really sure. Like for example, over here, I'm zoomed in at 33%. Let's say I want to see how my work looks at full scale. A keyboard shortcut for that would be to press the number 1 on the keyboard. So press 1, and then it'll zoom you into 100%, and you can see that down here in the status indicator. Now let's have a look at some of the basic controls for creating shapes. If I come over here to my rectangle tool and select that, I can click and drag on my canvas to create a rectangle. And as you can see, the rectangle is being created based on my hand movement. Now let's say I wanted to create a perfectly symmetrical square. To do that, I would just simply hold down my Control key. And holding Control will lock the aspect ratio so that it is a perfect square like that. And if I hold down the Shift key in addition to the Control key, it draws the square from the center out. So without Shift selected, we're drawing it from the top left down to the bottom right, or from the bottom right up to the top left, so on and so forth. But if you want to draw it from the center, just hold Control and Shift, just like that. Now, if at any point we want to move or rotate the object, we could just go back to our selection tool, and now we can click and drag to move the object around like that. And if you want to scale the object, you can grab one of these handles right here and you can scale the object like that. And you can lock the aspect ratio while scaling by holding the Control key. So if I hold Control while scaling the object, it preserves its aspect ratio. And if you want to rotate the object, if you notice here, when I clicked on the object, we have these outward pointing arrows. These represent scaling handles. If you want to get your rotation handles, all you have to do is click on the object a second time, and now we have our rotation handles, and you can click and drag to rotate your object like that. Now, if you want to lock it onto 15-degree increments, just hold your control key, and it'll lock the object as you rotate it, making it really easy to create precise rotations. So let's say you wanted these corners to go perfectly vertical, kind of like a diamond shape. If you hold control, it makes it really easy. If you're not holding control, it's kind of difficult. You can see it doesn't really get the exact angle. And if you notice down here in the status menu, it shows you while I'm rotating, it shows you what the angle is while I do that. So that's a handy little trick right there. And in the center of the object, you'll see this little crosshair. This represents the rotation center of the object. So right now it's located in the center. If I were to move this rotation center out here, I can now rotate this object around that center point like that. And again, if I hold control, I can very easily lock it onto 15-degree rotation angles. Now, if at any point you want to place the crosshair back into the center of the object, all you have to do is hold the Shift key and click on it, and it'll place it right back in the center of the object, as you can see there. And one other handy little shortcut is when clicking and dragging an object, you can press the space bar to stamp copies of it. So every time while I'm moving this object, every time I press the space bar, it's creating copies, as you can see there. Now I'm going to undo all of that by pressing Control Z or Command Z if you're on Mac. And let me show you as an example of what can be done with this. So let me scale this down a little bit. I'm going to hold my Control key while I do that. I'm going to click on the object again to get back to the rotation handles. And one thing I forgot to mention, if you want to get back to your scaling handles, just click the object again and it gets back to the scaling handles. So you could toggle back and forth between those two settings right there. Oops, I went a little too fast there. Let me try that again. And let's say I want to take this crosshair. I'm going to take this crosshair. I'm going to hold the Control key to lock it onto the vertical axis and move it down like this. I'm going to grab this rotation handle and I'm going to hold control to lock it there, or to lock it onto 15-degree increments. And I'm going to press the space bar key as I rotate this object around that center. Let me undo that. I ran out of space on my trackpad. There we go. And you could create objects going around a center point just like that by holding control and pressing the space bar as you stamp them. So now that we've gone over the basics, let's start drawing some shapes and objects. I'm going to start off by grabbing the rectangle tool from the toolbar over here, and I'll click and drag on the canvas to draw a rectangle. And if I zoom in on this rectangle, you can see we have some handles at the corners. These square handles allow you to change the width and the height of the object. And then this rounded handle over here allows you to give the rectangle rounded corners if you click and drag it down. And then you could take this other rounded handle and bring this over to give the entire edge of the rectangle a rounded contour, as you can see there. Now, if at any point you want to make your rectangle have sharp corners again, all you have to do is come up here to the Tool Settings menu and click this button that says Make Corners Sharp when you hover your cursor over it. So I'll click on that, and now our rectangle has sharp corners again. So let me press Delete on the keyboard to get rid of that. I'll come over here to the Circles and Ellipses tool, and I'll do the same thing. I'm going to click and drag on my canvas, only this time I'm going to hold my Control key while I do that, so that I'm creating a perfectly round circle, as you can see there. And much like the rectangle tool, the handles that are square allow you to change the width and the height of the object. But this rounded handle over here, if you click and drag on this, it allows you to create a partial circle. Now, if I have my cursor outside of the circle, you can see it creates a partial circle based on its radius. But if I move my cursor to the inside of the circle, now it's creating the circle based on its diameter. So if I bring the cursor back to the outside, we have a partial circle again. We can use this to create pie charts and the like. And if at any point you want to make this a whole circle again, just come up here to the Tool Settings menu and click on this button that says Make the Shape a Whole Ellipse. And there you go. Now you have a perfectly round circle again. So let me press Delete on the keyboard to get rid of that. I'll press 1 on my keyboard to zoom out to 100%. And if you come up here to the tool settings, you see we have two different types of shapes we can create here. We can create a polygon, or we can create a star. So I'm going to start off with a star, and I'm going to click and drag to create my star. And while I do this, I'm going to hold the Control key and move my cursor straight up so that I'm creating a perfectly upright star. Now I can come up here to the Tool Settings menu and add corners to this star. And if I want to change the appearance of this star, I can grab this handle in the center, or towards the center, and click and drag it to distort it like that. Now, if I hold the control key while I do that, it locks it onto its center. So you can bring it all the way in and create this starburst effect, or you could bring it all the way out like that. Now, if you want to change this over to a polygon, you could just click on the polygon button in the tool settings menu, and now we have an 8-sided polygon or octagon. Now I'm going to come over here to the corners setting, and I'm going to bring this down to 6. So now we have a hexagon. And now I'm going to convert this object from a polygon to a path. So I'll come up here to the menu, I'll go to Path, and I will select Object to Path. And now Inkscape no longer recognizes this as a polygon or a shape object. It is now a pure vector path. Now a path is a vector object in its purest form. If I come over here to the Nodes tool, you can see the individual coordinate points that make up this object. These are known as nodes, and I can click and drag these nodes to distort the shape of the object. So let me press Ctrl Z to put that back to where it was. And what I could also do is if I click on one of these nodes, I can make the node rounded if I want to. So I could select the node, and I can come up here to the tool settings menu, and I can click on the Make Selected Nodes Auto Smooth button, and now we have a smooth node. And it gives us these handles that we can use to distort the object even further. Now, if at any point you want to make the corner sharp again, you could just click on this setting right here that says Make Selected Nodes a Corner. And now it is made into a corner and the nodes are separate. Or I'm sorry, the handles are separate and you can distort them independently. And if you click on that button again, it gets rid of the curvature and makes it a regular sharp corner again. Another thing you could do is come up here to the tool settings menu and enable the corners live path effect by clicking on that button. And when you do that, you'll see we have these little round handles next to each node. If I click and drag one of these handles, you can see what happens there. It takes the entire path and gives it a rounded contour like that. And what you could also do is you can click and drag over these bottom nodes over here, and you could change the contour of all of these nodes at once when you have them all selected. So now we have a custom shape like that. Another thing you can do is you can scale and rotate your nodes as well. So if I select these top 3 nodes over here, I can come up here to the tool settings menu and I can enable this setting that says show transformation handles for selected nodes. And when I do that, you could see we now have these transformation handles that allow us to scale the nodes, kind of like we did with the object, what I showed you earlier with scaling and rotating. So if I were to take this top arrow over here and hold the control key and scale this up, you could see what's happening here. It's scaling the nodes based on that transformation. So I'll bring this up to here and I'll release the click. Now I'll turn off that setting and I'll just take this node right here and I'll hold control and just bring this down a little bit just to flatten this. And as you can see here, we've created this nice little custom shape that can serve as the foundation for a badge, an emblem, or even a logo. So let me press 1 on the keyboard to zoom back out to 100%. I'll go back to my selection tool. I'll press delete on the keyboard to get rid of that shape. And now let's go over another way in which you can draw objects on your canvas, which would be with the pen tool. So if you come over here to your toolbar, you'll notice you have the pen tool. Another way to access it is to press the letter B on your keyboard. That's a handy little shortcut. So I'll click on that to select it. And this tool allows you to draw your own custom shapes. So if you don't want to create artwork based on these predefined shapes, you can use the pen tool to click and add points. I'm adding anchor points as I do this to create my own custom shape. And if I connect it back to the starting point, you can see I have created my own shape. Now let me press delete on the keyboard to get rid of that. Another thing you could do with the pen tool is if you click once to add a point, you can hold the control key and it brings the line straight up and straight left and right and at 15-degree increments. So if you wanted to draw a perfectly horizontal line, you could do that by holding your control key and then clicking again to add another point. And if you want to draw a curved line, all you have to do is hold the click and drag. And as you drag, it brings out these handles that allows you to draw a curved line. Now I'm going to hold the control key while I do that so that the handles are nice and flat on the horizontal axis. And then I'll release the click. I'll bring the path down here. I'll click again. I'll hold the control key, bring this line straight down, and then I will come over here to the starting point. And just like that, we created a custom shape with one side of it being rounded. Now the pen tool has a pretty steep learning curve associated with it. I have an entire lesson dedicated to mastering the pen tool. I'll have that linked in the description below if you want to delve into that. So for now, I'm going to go back to my selection tool. I'm going to press delete on the keyboard to get rid of this. And now let's go over path operations. Path operations are a way to create new shapes based on how several shapes interact with each other. To show you what I mean, I'm going to grab my stars and polygons tool. I'm going to use the polygon setting, and I'm going to bring the corners down to 3. And now I'm going to click and drag on the canvas. I'm going to hold Control and bring the cursor straight up so that we have a nice flat triangle like that. I'm going to grab my selection tool and I'm going to move this up. And what I'll do now is I'll right click on this object and go to duplicate. And now we have another copy of this object. And I'll hold my Control key and click and drag this object down here like this. And now we have this tree sort of shape. The problem is that this is 2 separate shapes. If I wanted to merge these 2 shapes together so that they become a single path, all I have to do is click and drag over both of them to select both of them. Or another way that you could select both of them is to click one of them, hold Shift, and then click the other one. And with them both selected, we can go to Path and select Union. And then it merges those 2 shapes together into a single path. And you can see, if you come over here to the Nodes tool, this is now a single object. So let me put that back to where it was. Let me zoom out a little bit. Let me grab my selection tool and move this off to the side. I'm going to show you another path operation. This time I'm going to grab the circles and ellipses tool. I'm going to click and drag. I'm going to hold the Control key to make this a perfectly round circle, release the click, and then I'll grab my selection tool and I'm going to right click this object and go to duplicate. And I'll make this duplicate copy gray. And I'll move this object up and to the right like this. And then I'll hold the Control key and grab this handle up here and scale this down like that. And what I'm paying attention to here is the area that sticks out of this black shape right here. I'm going to select both of these objects, and now I'm going to do another path operation. Instead of union, I'm going to do the opposite of that, which is difference. So I'll come up here to where it says path, and I'll go down to this option right here that says difference. And when I click on that, you can see what happens. It takes the top object and subtracts it from the bottom object. And now we have this crescent moon sort of shape. And once again, if you come over here to your Nodes tool, you can see this is a single path. We were able to use path operations to create this crescent moon shape based on how the 2 circles interact with each other. So now I'll grab my selection tool. I'm going to scale this down, and I'm going to hold Control while I do that to maintain the proportions. We don't want to distort the crescent moon, so make sure to hold the Control key. And I'll move this off to the side. And now let's go over how to align objects. So I'm going to grab my tree that I created earlier. Let's say I wanted to create a trunk for this tree. I'm going to grab my rectangle tool to do that. And I'll click and drag to draw a rectangle that will represent the trunk. And I'll make this black to match the original object that I drew. And the problem with this object here, I'm going to grab my selection tool again. The problem here is that this object is not perfectly aligned with the object above it. I can try to eyeball it and place it directly in the center, but the problem is it'll never be directly. It'll be pretty hard to make it be directly in the center. So this is where the Align and Distribute menu comes in handy. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open my Align and Distribute menu by coming up here to the Object menu and coming down here to the bottom where it says Align and Distribute. And that menu will open over here in your dockable menus. Now with this object selected, I'm going to hold my Shift key and select the tree so that I have both of these objects selected. And in the Align and Distribute menu, you can choose to align objects based on a variety of different settings. I'm going to choose Last Selected. And what's going to happen is when I align these objects now, it's going to take the rectangle and move it based on the location of the tree. The tree itself is going to stay anchored in place. So if I come over here and select this option that says Center on Vertical Axis, it'll center it up perfectly. And you can see we have all of these other options here. If I can move this to the left like that if I want to, I can align it to the left, I can align it to the right, I can place it on the bottom of the object like that, and then I can place it back in the center, which is where I originally wanted it. And now that we have that in place, I can come up here to where it says Path and go to Union, and now that is a unified path. So let me scale this down a little bit. I'm going to hold Control while I do that. In fact, I'll hold Control and Shift while I do that to scale it down from the center. And let's say I want to center this object directly in the middle of my canvas. Right now it's a little off center. So if I put this over here, I can come over here to the Align and Distribute menu. And instead of Last Selected, I'm going to choose Page. Now I can align objects relative to the page. So I'll center this vertically and horizontally, and now the tree is placed directly in the center of the page. And I could take my crescent moon and put it back over here, and we're done. So now let's go over how we can fill these objects in with some color. I'm going to click on my tree to select it, and I'll come down here to the color palette, and I'm going to select a color to fill it in with. For this demonstration, I'm going to choose this shade of dark green, and now the object is dark green. Let's say I don't like this shade of dark green though, and I want to choose something a little more specific to my preference. This is where the fill and stroke menu comes in handy. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come up here to where it says object, and I will select fill and stroke, and that's going to open the fill and stroke menu over here in the dockable menus. And I can use this menu. I think by default the color wheel is collapsed. If you want to work with the color wheel, you can just expand this menu and you can choose your color as you'd like from this menu. Or you can use these sliders down here, or if you have a specific color code you'd like to work with, you can enter in that hex code down here. Or if you have RGB values, you could just come up here to this drop down and choose your colors based on RGB, and you could type your RGB codes in there. So I'm going to set mine back to HSL. I'm going to adjust the color a little bit, and now the object has the color that I've chosen. Now every vector path has two properties assigned to it. It has a fill color and a stroke color. The fill color is the color that goes within the shape. The stroke color is the color that gets applied to the outline of the shape. Now right now there's no outline around this object because there's no stroke applied. But if I wanted to apply a stroke to this object, I can come over here to the stroke paint tab and I can click on this blue box, and it'll apply a stroke. Although you can't see it yet, if you come over here to the stroke style tab, you can increase and decrease the size. So there's a black stroke applied to this object here. If I come back over here to the stroke paint tab, the color chosen is black, and I can come back over here to the stroke style tab, and I can increase the size of this. And as I do that, you can see that the stroke is growing in size. Now this is not a separate object from the tree. This is still one vector path. If I grab my nodes tool, I can move this node around and you can see everything works in unison here because this is all one object. Like I said, these are two properties that are applied to one path. So I'll come over here to my stroke paint tab and I will change the color of the stroke to something else. And a shortcut for working with strokes, if I come back to my selection tool, let's say you want to apply a stroke or even remove the stroke. If you want to remove the stroke, you can click on this X button over here in the menu, or a shortcut would be to hold your Shift key and click on the red X down here at the bottom left of the screen, and that'll remove it from the object. So this is actually a handy little shortcut that you can use. If you want to apply a fill color, you could just click on the color. And if you want to apply a stroke color, you could hold Shift and click on the color, and holding Shift and clicking will apply the stroke color like that. So let me apply a different fill, and then I'll apply a different colored stroke. And there we go. Now we have a fill and a stroke applied to this object. I'll zoom out, I'll select my moon, and I will make this a different color. I'll come over here to the fill tab, and I will choose a shade of yellow for this. And I will give this a stroke as well. So I will hold the Shift key, and I'll click on maybe the color orange. And I'll have to come over here to the stroke style tab and increase the size of that. And there we go. So now we'll do a brief practice exercise that ties together some of the things we've learned so far, and then we'll finish it off by demonstrating how the Shape Builder tool works. So to get started, I'm going to grab my circles and ellipses tool. I'm going to click and drag on the canvas to draw a circle. I'm going to hold the Control key while I do that so we have a perfectly round circle. And I want to get rid of the outline or the stroke around this object, so I'm going to hold Shift and click on the red X to get rid of the outline. And then I'm going to click on the black color to make the circle black. And then I'll grab my selection tool, and I want to make this circle 700 by 700 pixels. So I'm going to come up here to the tool settings menu. You'll notice we have the letter W, which represents the width of the selected object, and then we have H, which represents the height. So I'm going to lock this icon right here so that we're scaling this object proportionately as we change these settings. And I'm going to change this from whatever this number is to 700, and then I'll press enter. And now we have a 700 by 700 pixel circle. And I want to take this circle and place it in the center of my document. So I'll come back over here to the Align and Distribute menu. I should have page selected from my drop-down still. And with that selected, I'm going to center it up on the page vertically and horizontally. And now I'm going to right click this circle and go to duplicate. And I'll make this duplicate copy gray. And now I'll size down this circle so that it's 600 pixels instead of 700. So I'll come back up here, I'll change this to 600, press enter. And I want to center this up on the page as well. So I'll center this up vertically and horizontally. And then I'm going to duplicate this again. I'll right click it and go to duplicate. I'll make this one black. And I want to make this one half the size of the previous circle. So that would be 300 pixels. I'll make this 300 and press enter. And now I want to position this circle so that it's in the center, but aligned to the top of the circle behind it. So I'll grab my selection tool and I'm going to hold shift and click on the circle behind it. So I should have both of these circles selected. I'll come over here to the Align to Distribute menu and I'm going to change this from page to last selected. And I'm going to center it on the vertical axis. And then I'm going to click this button over here that says Align Top Edges. And when I do that, the circle should be perfectly aligned in the center and placed at the top of this edge right here. Now I'll click off of the graphic onto the canvas to deselect everything. I'll take this circle, right click it, go to duplicate, hold shift, click on the circle beneath it, and now I will align this one to the bottom. So I'll click on this button over here in the Align to Distribute menu that says Align Bottom Edges. And now that circle is aligned to the bottom of the circle beneath it. So now I want to deselect these objects. To deselect the objects, you can click off of the graphic onto the canvas. Another way that you could do that is just by pressing the escape key. So I'll press escape and now the objects are deselected. I'm going to select this object, right click it and duplicate it again. And I'll make this one gray. And I want to make this one 1/3 of the original circle, or the circle that we just made. So that would be 100 pixels. So I'll change this to 100, press enter. And then I want to align this in the center of this circle right here. So I'll hold the shift key, click on the circle beneath it, align it vertically and horizontally, and then press escape to deselect it. Select this circle and duplicate it again. Right click, go to duplicate, hold shift, click on this circle down here, and now we're going to align that one horizontally so that we have this shape right here. We have this whole setup that we've created. So let me click off of that to deselect everything. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to select all of these objects and I'm going to use the Shape Builder tool to turn this into a yin-yang symbol. So I'll come over here to the Tools menu and I will select this tool right here that says Shape Builder when you hover your cursor over it. And now it's going to take us into this environment. Now the Shape Builder tool works two ways. You can add shapes together or you can subtract them. I'm going to choose this option to start us off, which says Add Shapes Together. And the way this works is I can click and drag a line going through these two objects right here to unify them together. And now those two segments of those intersecting shapes became one single shape. So I'm going to do the same thing with the outer ring. I'm going to add this shape to the outer ring. And then I'm going to click on this circle in the center here to add that to the mix. Now, if you notice, everything that's blue here represents the object that's remaining. And now I want to delete these gray areas out of here. So now I'm going to change the setting from add to subtract. I'm going to select this option right here. And now I can click and drag to delete those objects out of there like that. And now I want to delete this object out of here. And if I go back to my selection tool, you can see what happened there. We were able to take the intersecting areas of those shapes and create this yin-yang symbol. So let me make this object black. And if you notice, these are two separate objects. You have the outer shape and then you have the circle in the center. You could tell by the bounding box around that circle that these are two separate shapes. It also indicates it down here in the tool status bar. It says two objects selected. Let's unify these shapes together by going to Path and selecting Union. And now it's one single shape. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold Control and Shift and scale this down. And just like that, we have created a simple yin-yang symbol. So in this final part of the lesson, we'll be going over how you can save and export your work. First, let's go over how you can save your work so that you can open it up and work with it later on if you'd like to. To save your work, come up here to where it says File and go to Save As. And from the Save As menu, you want to make sure that you're choosing Inkscape SVG. If you want to preserve your work in such a way that you can open this file back up and continue working on it without skipping a beat, you'll want to choose Inkscape SVG. Now you'll notice there's a lot of different file formats in here. You could save your work as a PDF if you want, a plain SVG, but it's recommended that you use Inkscape SVG if you want to preserve everything in its current state. Plain SVG is more or less for web-based SVG graphics, whereas Inkscape SVG preserves all of the Inkscape-specific features and elements so that you can always go back and continue working on it later on. And once you do that, you can choose a name for your file and just click the Save button. Now let's say you want to take an element on your canvas, let's say for example this object right here, and export just this graphic so that you can use this as a PNG or a JPEG image. To do that, first select the object and then open the Export menu by going to File and going to Export. The Export menu will open over here in your dockable menus. Now, if you just want to export this one object, you'll want to choose Selection, the Selection tab in this menu. If you want to export the entire page or everything on your canvas, select Page. If you want to export the entire document, which includes everything on the page and outside of it, choose that option. And Custom is if you want to dictate a specific area of your canvas to export based on X and Y coordinate points. So for this demonstration, we're just going to use Selection. And you'll notice down here, it shows a preview of what exactly will be exported. It shows you where the transparent areas of your graphic is. So you can click on this drop-down right here to choose the type of file format you want to export. If you want to export this graphic with a transparent background, I would recommend using .png. And click on this folder icon right here to choose an area to export the work to. I'm going to export this as yin yang. And make sure you choose PNG from this dropdown over here, because sometimes with Inkscape it'll default to SVG even though you select PNG. It might be a bug in the current version of Inkscape, so just make sure you double check this right here. I'm going to choose PNG from this dropdown and then I'll click Save. And once you click Save, the file should be exported. So let me go open it up and show you. So as you can see here, I have opened up my yin yang PNG file, and you can see exactly what was exported, and you can see exactly where the transparent areas of the graphic are based on this checkerboard indicator in the background. So that's how you can go about saving and exporting your work. So as I'm sure you could imagine, we haven't even begun to scratch the surface of what's possible with Inkscape, but hopefully this lesson has served as a good starting point. If you want to learn more about Inkscape, then I have hundreds of tutorials on this channel that will teach you how to make logos and various graphics and effects with step-by-step instructions. And if you really want to learn the ins and outs of Inkscape, then be sure to check out my Inkscape Masterclass. It's a collection of over 60 videos where I go over every tool and feature in Inkscape and I explain what it is and demonstrate how it works. Kind of like how I did in this video. It comes with quizzes and exercises that you can use to practice what you've learned, and we even have a private community where you can ask questions and get help from me anytime you want. I'm in there every morning answering your questions, and best of all, there's no monthly membership fees. It's just a one-time cost of $17 and you're in for life. I'll have that linked below if you want to check it out, and as always, thanks for watching.